The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. With few exceptions, but this is page 176. With few exceptions, most Native American cultures did not have our notions as part of their collective mythos. Instead of the story that we're separate from creation and born to dominate it, these older cultures held a different view of the place of humans in the order of creation. They believe we are part of the world. We are made of the same flesh as other animals. We eat the same plants. We share the same air, water, soil, and food with every other life form on the planet. We are born into life by the same means as other mammals, and when we die, like them, we become part of the soil that will nourish future generations. They also believe it is our destiny to cooperate with the rest of creation. Every life form has its special purpose in the grand ecosystem, and all are to be respected, they believed. Each animal and plant has its own unique intelligence and spirit. We are permitted to compete with other plants and animals, but we may not wantonly destroy them. All life is absolutely as sacred as human life. Although hunting and killing for food are part of nature's order, when we do so, it must be done with respect and thankfulness. Older cultures are most often cooperators, not dominators. There are human cultures who do not engage in the destruction of the world. They demonstrate that destruction and domination are not an inevitable part of human nature. Prior to the emergence of younger cultures about 7,000 years ago, the anthropological record shows that not one culture believed itself to be separate from and superior to nature. We find the remnants of these older cultures in tribal people around the world, such as the San, the Kogi, the Ik of Uganda, the Navajo, the Hopi, the Cree, the Ojibwa, living in harmony with the world around them, the people around them, and seeing all life as sacred. The San Bushmen don't even qualify as Stone Age, since they've never used stone implements, only tools made from wood. And yet they were successfully pursuing their way of life 40,000 years before Aristotle, and they still are. They leave behind few traces, as they are such masters of resource management. That's sustainability. And contrary to the stories of our culture, it was and is often a happy and comfortable life. When we lived like that thousands of years ago, we enjoyed cradle-to-grave security. The tribe took care of itself. We cared for one another. If anybody had food, everybody had food. If anybody had a diseased child or an infirm parent, everybody had a diseased child or an infirm parent. The measure of wealth in such societies was security. Mediums of exchange like money were unnecessary. The idea of hoarding food or other things was unthinkable because everybody was responsible for everybody. Our ancient ancestors lived in the way of all other cooperator societies in nature, but be they the society of wolves or chimpanzees or prairie dogs, they looked out for one another. Our ancestors, people like you and me of all races and all continents, lived like this all over the world for 40 to 200,000 years, depending on whose archaeology you accept. And then there were eruptions among traditional cultures. In some parts of the world, people began to move away from their hunting and gathering lifestyle by experimenting with agriculture. This created more efficient food production, thus increasing their numbers and giving some people the ability to hoard food, the beginning of what we call wealth. Then a subgroup of the agriculturalists began experimenting with a new cultural idea of coercive or forced evangelism, of bringing others into their culture in a way that had never been done before. Their gods told me that if they couldn't evangelize others, then they should utterly destroy them. They were a very few, perhaps probably not more than a dozen tribes, which arose out of the tens of thousands of tribes that populated the planet. And this small number of tribes proceeded to wipe out and displace and destroy the thousands of other tribes who were living in a sustainable, peaceful, and connected to nature way. They left the garden and began to create dominating city-states and then empires. They were the first people infected with Wetiko, the origin of our younger culture. And because of this, they had become more efficient at increasing their own numbers. They had more sunlight under their own personal control. Of course, there was a price to pay for this. While the San, Kogi, Ik, and other native peoples may spend less than 2 to 4 hours a day gathering food and attending to the needs of life, and do to this day, by the way, in younger culture societies, this balance was radically shifted as average people must work longer and harder just to survive. Those who were the dominating individuals in the culture, however, could live luxuriously and work less and less. So for every person who only worked an hour or two a day, another person would have to work 4 or 8 or 10 hours a day or more. Without massive exploitation of resources or theft from others, for every person with 10 times as much wealth, 10 people must have only 1/10 as much. Social and economic classes were born, and the first governments came into being to define, order, and control the socio-economic structure and help the wealthy maintain and increase their riches. Whether they knew it or not, these governments, mostly kingdoms in the early days, transmitted younger culture values to all citizens, rich and poor. The power brokers of this time programmed the consciousness of their subjects, just as our governments, educational institutions, and mass media do today. Nobody knows what brought about the first eruption of Wetiko cultural insanity, but logic suggests it was most likely happened in places where food resources were only cyclically abundant. For example, the Tlingit and Weda Native American tribes of the Pacific Northwest and the area around Vancouver Island were apparently extensive traders and owners of slaves. And this was because they could store food. This is where it all began, beginning wealth. Anyhow, the book is The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. This is just a small dip into it.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Happy Friday, listeners. I'm Sam Sachs, filling in for Tom here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Thank you for tuning in. We are broadcasting on commercial radio stations from coast to coast on Sirius XM all across the North American continent, on Pacifica stations across America, Europe, and Africa, American Forces Radio on every U.S. military base in the world, on your electronic device via TuneIn, Progressive Voices, and the Thom Hartmann app, and simulcast as TV on both Dish Network, DirecTV, and cable systems nationwide. Folks, it's Anything Goes Friday. The number is 202-808-9925. I want to hear from you on all the issues of the day, which means you can call in and talk about Kofifi. I don't care. We can talk sports. We can talk baseball. Anything goes today. Big news, Trump did indeed pull out of the Paris Climate Accord. He did what we all knew he was going to do, and in the process, he's done serious damage to the global effort to combat climate change, and he's thoroughly embarrassed the U.S. on the world stage. If you've just heard the reactions from world leaders over the last 12 hours on this decision, anger, mockery, all of it well-deserved, frankly. We'll talk more about this a bit later and throughout the show and in your phone calls. Suffice to say, though, that the president has made a number of very destructive decisions so far in his administration, and this one could be the most destructive, considering we are literally talking about the fate of the planet. Bad news, it's not something that we can impeach him over. Good news, he's done a lot of other things, though, that we can impeach him over. And given that the planet can't wait around for another 4 or 8 years before the U.S. decides to do something about global warming, maybe the best bet is to get the ball rolling on impeachment ASAP. Joining me now is someone who is making that same exact case. It's John Nichols, the esteemed national affairs correspondent with The Nation magazine. Hey, John, good to talk with you again.
Sam, it's an honor to be with you.
So here's how I've been approaching this impeachment question. I was concerned at the beginning that Democrats were relying too much on the Russia probe, hoping it would be the silver bullet that takes the Trump administration down. I know a lot of people on the left are absolutely convinced that there was collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, or that there's some sort of P-tape out there or something involving Donald Trump. But ultimately, I saw it as a big risk because it could very well be that there is no impeachable offense here, that Michael Flynn had violated the Foreign Agents Registration Act and Manafort and all these other things. Whatever comes out of it, it might not be something that could lead to Trump's impeachment, and thus all the energy here might have been squandered. I still think that, but then Trump came along and did a huge favor by firing the FBI director, James Comey, and suddenly it's not just the Russia stuff that's on the table for impeachable offenses, it's obstruction of justice and abuse of power. And as of right now, we have a lot more evidence backing up those crimes than any of the collusion stuff. So how should Democrats play this new hand that Trump has given them recently?
Well, you laid things out very well. And one thing that's important to understand is impeachment is a political act. It is not a legal action. Most people struggle with that. And it's in part because I think our political elites are so frightened by the concept of impeachment that they fetishize it. They turn it into something that seems like a third rail. That's not how the founders intended it. The founders intended for the people and their elected representatives to have a vehicle to remove an official who was corrupt, who was lawless, or who was simply managing the office in a way that was destructive to the United States, that was damaging to the country, to its democracy, to its functioning. They didn't want for a president to be a king for 4 years, i.e. untouchable during that time, or to be, as a term that was also used long ago, an elected despot. So impeachment is something that can be used when there is wide-scale popular sentiment that it's time to get rid of someone. You don't have to have an indictable offense. You don't have to have, all the evidence of a crime. But you have to have a clear sense of wrongdoing. You are undoing an election result, so you don't want to take it casually. But by the same token, you don't want to be so fetishized, again, that you can't do it unless you touch every button and look every way and stand on one foot, etc. If we use that standard, the founding standard, the intended standard for impeachment, then Donald Trump has by almost every measure, in fact, I would say by every measure, met it. It is clear that Donald Trump and those around him have not respected the emoluments clause of the Constitution. It is clear that they have connived and manipulated and gamed the process in order to, at the very least, protect themselves, potentially to advantage themselves. And remember, let's just say that perhaps we're talking here about a Jared Kushner rather than Donald Trump, and yet it's Donald Trump who empowers these people. And so, again, you have a clear opening to have a discussion about impeachment. It's appropriate. It's healthy. There's nothing wrong with it. Now, that's going to be hard, of course, because Paul Ryan will literally come up with a defense for anything that Donald Trump does. We understand that. But the fact is that if Democrats get their act together on this and speak about it in clear and coherent ways, and if they are respectful of Republicans who also have deep concerns, and there are a number of Republican members of the House who have expressed deep, deep concerns about what's going on, there's clearly the opening for raising the impeachment debate. And then you see where it goes. Remember, one final note on this. If you take impeachment off the table, if you say, well, that's just something we're not going to do, that we're not going that way for whatever reason, be it political, be it practical, be it, whatever, then what you are saying is you're rolling all of your dice. You're counting entirely on investigations by a Republican Congress, by a Mr. Mueller, perhaps by others, which could take years to complete. And that's absurd. I mean, if you've got a clear sense that the guy is doing damage to the country, you don't say, oh, well, but the one thing that the founders intended for you to do, if there's a clear problem, that's off the table. We got to wait for something else to come along. That's silly. It's irresponsible. It's certainly not the way that our Constitution was outlined or defined to operate.
I enjoyed your line in your recent piece on this issue in The Nation, in which you say basically that impeachment won't cause a constitutional crisis. It's to cure a constitutional crisis. And you brought up emoluments, because that's another potential offense that Trump has committed here. And we just got news last week that the Trump Organization is not doing its due diligence to segregate its revenue it receives from foreign sources, which could be emoluments in violation of the Constitution. They said that would be too burdensome for them. So they're just basically, throwing those rules out the window here, and nobody seems to be holding them accountable here.
And you see, that is actually why you have this political repair, right? Because when you have rules, many of those rules have to be applied by interpretation, right? You say, well, no, what you're doing is not right. You are not following the rules as is intended. And as a result, the branch of government that is designed to check and balance the president, to check and balance the executive branch, and that's the legislature, that's the Congress, has the power to hold you to account. Again, with impeachment, you don't have to go to court. You don't have to, hire tons of lawyers and do all the structural stuff that goes with the judicial branch of government. With impeachment, it is a political act. Congress has the power to move, and if there is sufficient support, to impeach a president and to try that president in the Senate for wrongdoing. And here's the interesting part about it. With I like it even better in some ways, the absurdity of the circumstance we're in. I think here you have a Republican Congress, right? You've got a Republican House, Republican Senate. Certainly, they're not going to bend over backwards to punish a Republican president. It's not their nature. And yet, if we presume, and we should, that there are some principled Republicans, if you raise this issue, you essentially force the Republicans to address the fundamental questions. But if you take the issue, if you take the proposal for impeachment off the table and you say, well, we're not going to talk about that, then you create this void in which everybody's waiting for the next shoe to drop rather than the legislative branch actually doing its job.
John, we're about to run up into a break here. Do you have a few more minutes to stick around till about the half-hour mark? I got a few more questions on this issue.
I'm delighted to talk to you.
Great. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to hit a break. We're going to talk to Free Speech TV and talk a little bit more about this. And then we'll come back for the radio listeners and get to the whole issue of why Democrats seem so reluctant to pursue this impeachment case and what kind of benefit there would be for them if they did actually pursue it. We're here. We're talking with John Nichols, the national affairs correspondent with The Nation magazine. We will be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
More with John Nichols. After the break, we're talking the impeachment or pursuing impeachment against Donald Trump. And welcome back. I'm Sam Sachs, filling in for Thom Hartmann here on the Thom Hartmann Program, and I'm joined by the national affairs correspondent with The Nation magazine, John Nichols. Hey, John.
Pleasure, my friend.
So what do you make so far of the reluctance on the part of Democrats to pursue impeachment? Nancy Pelosi sort of chastised Maxine Waters, California Congresswoman. She's been one of the more vocal people ever since Trump was even elected calling for impeachment. I saw Cory Booker take a pretty soft approach when it comes to Trump. He wasn't really talking about impeachment, but he said how uncomfortable he is calling Trump a liar. it doesn't seem like there's enough willingness. And there are some members of Congress, like Al Green, who actually went to the floor and laid out the case for impeachment. But there doesn't seem to be much willingness on the part of Democratic leadership to really go 100% down this road.
Without a doubt, you're correct. In fact, there is a clearly outlined and firm reluctance at the top level to pursue this. Below the top level, there are members of Congress, including the new co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Mark Pocan, who've talked about this issue on the floor, or at least talked about the idea that impeachment is an option. There are the folks you've mentioned and several others, including, I would note, some Republicans have actually used the word. They haven't said, oh, we're ready to impeach, but what they've said is, if we've got an obstruction of justice here, as regards some of the things that Trump did with Comey and some of the conversations around that could well be an impeachable offense. So the conversation is real. It's alive. It's just not dynamic, not functioning at the top levels. Now, this is where the problem comes in. There's simply no question that many prominent Democrats, and especially many Democratic strategists, think that Trump is such a mess that if they just stand down, if they just sort of sit back and let him keep messing up, that come 2018, you will have a very good circumstance for Democrats, i.e., that even a lot of moderate Republicans will vote for Democratic candidates in swing congressional districts, maybe even in some more difficult districts, and that Trump can be checked and balanced with those election results. The problem with this theory, first off, is that it's a dereliction of duty. If it's appropriate to impeach somebody, you don't put it off just waiting for the next election. But secondly, there's a great danger in that politically. So first of all, I always put the responsibility, the moral argument first. But if we go to the political argument, here's where the problem comes in. If you recall the 2016 election, Sam, and I know it was a long time ago, so you may not remember, but there are an awful lot of people who were sure that Trump was going to lose during the 2016 election. Yeah. Right? And they would just say, well, of course he's going to. That's just a given. When you make assumptions about political results in volatile times, and an assumption that things are going to go your way, you actually, A, you fail the process because you may be wrong, but B, you also send a signal to the people, and that is that it's all politics for you, right? It's not. You're not trying to do good for the country, not trying to do right by the country. You're making a political calculus. And that's a dangerous game because that can become a factor in how people respond to the circumstance.
And it's dangerous in the sense having that sort of notion that we're going to win in the midterms regardless of what Trump does. We're dealing with gerrymandering, we're dealing with voter ID, we're dealing with cross-check, all those things. More with John Nichols from The Nation talking about impeaching Trump right after this. And welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Sam Sachs, filling in for Tom, and we're talking with John Nichols, the national affairs correspondent with The Nation magazine. And over the break, John and I were discussing some reluctance on the part of Democratic leadership to really pursue impeachment. One of the things that I hear from my friends on the left whenever this issue comes up, they advise against it because they say, okay, assume Republicans jump on board and we do impeach Trump. Then we get Mike Pence. And a lot of people believe that Mike Pence could more effectively carry out a very destructive Republican agenda than Trump, who is mired in scandal, who's jumping around from one thing to the other. What do you make of that argument? And is it possible that impeachment proceedings against Trump could also take down Mike Pence?
Very good set of questions. Let's take them apart. First off, the people who fret about Mike Pence a great deal have a lot more respect for Pence than I do. They're assuming this guy is some sort of political genius who can take an incredibly unpopular agenda and shove it through. I don't buy that. I don't see any evidence of it. In fact, I see in many instances where Mike Pence stands is less popular than where Donald Trump stands. And So I think first off, it's an assumption that I don't think is grounded in a lot of reality. Mm-hmm. Secondly, there is very little evidence from history to suggest that if you impeach a president and then you move up the vice president, that vice president comes in a position of strength. Usually, the whole of the administration has been damaged. It has been, sanctioned, if you will, and tempered. And so I don't necessarily see the evidence there that Pence could, kind of ride in and take charge and push the agenda. Secondly, really, do you think Donald Trump isn't doing enough right now? He just pulled us out of the Paris Accord.
Yeah,
he's certainly acting in incredibly bold and over the top ways, some of which Pence might do. But with all due respect, I think people who say that are underestimating the circumstance that we are in already. And finally, as regards your question or your secondary question, could you impeach Pence as well? I think you have to be a little careful about saying, yeah, we're going after everybody. That sounds too political at times. But if there is wrongdoing on Mike Pence's part, and if there is incompetence, which clearly his argument on all the Flynn stuff and so much else is that people didn't tell him about stuff when he was running the transition.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of absurdity. There's a lot of questions surrounding Pence, and even deeper, more serious questions surrounding Jeff Sessions and a few others in this administration. And it is important to recognize the impeachment power can be applied to presidents, vice presidents, and all the civil officers of an administration. So it doesn't just end with the presidency. But I would say at a fundamental level, you don't put off impeachment of someone who is clearly doing wrong, clearly doing damage, because you're afraid of who will come next.
Yeah.
We live in a country that has elections. We have a long line of succession. At some point, you have to step away from the political calculations and say what is right for the country. And when I wrote this piece for The Nation, what I was arguing is not saying, here's why you should go impeach. Other people can figure that out or determine whether they think it's right. My core argument, the most important thing I'm saying is don't take impeachment off the table. Don't avoid this. If the moment comes, if the circumstance is right, don't say, we just can't, that's the one thing we can't do. It's the wrong way of thinking. It's actually the one thing you can do. And it's, to my mind, a very good way for principled members of Congress to step up and say, look, I've had too much. I cannot accept what is going on. I cannot uphold my oath to protect and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. I can't do that by continuing to sustain this presidency.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think those kinds of statements are appealing to people. I think people hear that and like it.
And it could be a decent campaign message in 2018 as well. And your point about how impeachment proceedings would damage the administration itself and everyone associated with it, it could damage the entire Republican Party as well, considering how many Republicans we've seen, like Paul Ryan, go to the mat to defend every single thing this administration has done. John Nichols, National Affairs Correspondent with The Nation magazine. Follow him on Twitter at Nichols Uprising. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Honored to be with you, Sam.
Thank you, John.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Anything Goes Friday. Give us a call. We'll be right back.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Jane Mayer's new book, Dark Money, the history of the billionaires behind the rise of the radical right. And it's, by the way, just an extraordinary, astonishing book. This is from chapter 19, sort of the introductory chapter. And she's talking about one of the Koch summits where all these billionaires get together and plan strategy and throw money into the pot and that kind of thing. The highlight of the Koch summit in 2009 was, which, by the way, was the year President Obama's first year in office, was an uninhibited debate about what conservatives should do next in the face of their electoral defeat. As the donors and other guests dined in the hotel's banquet room like Roman senators attending a gladiator duel in the Forum, they watched a passionate argument unfold that encapsulated the stark choice ahead. Sitting on one side of the stage facing the participants was the Texas Senator John Cornyn, the head of the National Republican Senatorial Committee and former Justice on the Texas Supreme Court. Poised on the other side of the moderator was the South Carolina Senator Jim DeMint, a conservative provocateur who defined the outermost anti-establishment fringe of the Republican Party and who, in the words of one admirer, was the leader of the Huns. 57 at the time, he was 5 months older than Cornyn, but his dark hair, lean build, and more casual aw-shucks style made him appear years younger. Before his election to Congress, DeMint had run an advertising agency in South Carolina. He understood how to sell, and what he was pitching that night was an approach to politics that, according to the historian Sean Willits, would have been recognizable to DeMint's forebearers in the Palmetto State as akin to the radical nullification of federal power advocated in the 1860s by the Confederate secessionist John C. Calhoun. The two Republican senators had been at loggerheads for some time. That night, they gave opposing opening statements. Cornyn spoke in favor of the Republican Party fighting its way back to victory by broadening its appeal to a wider swath of voters, including moderates. In contrast, DeMint portrayed compromise as surrender. He had little patience for the slow-moving process of constitutional government. He regarded many of his Senate colleagues as timid and self-serving. The federal government posed such a dire threat to the dynamism of the American economy, in his view, that anything less than all-out war on regulations and spending was a cop-out. DeMint was the face of a new kind of extremism, and he spoke that evening in favor of purifying rather than diluting the Republican Party. He argued that he would rather have 30 Republicans who believed in something than a majority who believed in nothing, a line that was a mantra for him and that brought cheers and applause from the gathered onlookers. Rather than compromising their principles and working with the new administration, the Obama administration, DeMint argued, Republicans needed to take a firm stand against Obama, waging a campaign of massive resistance and obstruction regardless of the 2008 election outcome. Then they go through a discussion about how they debated, the TARP, and DeMint had voted against it, Cornyn for it, and, some of the just issue things. Sitting silently at a table in the front row through all this were Charles Koch and his wife, Liz. No one came to Cornyn's defense. It was widely assumed that the Kochs, as hardcore free market enthusiasts, had opposed the huge government bailouts of the private sector. Later, many reporters assumed this too, ascribing the Kochs' opposition to Obama as stemming from a principled disagreement over issues such as the TARP bailouts. But none of this was true. Had people checked the records, they would have found it quite revealing. At first, the Kochs political organization, Americans for Prosperity, had in fact taken what appeared to be a principled libertarian position against the bank bailouts. But the organization quickly and quietly reversed sides when the bottom began to fall out of the stock market, threatening the Kochs' own vast investment portfolio. The market had begun to collapse on Monday, September 29, when, in the face of heavy opposition from conservatives, the House unexpectedly failed to pass a federal rescue plan. By the end of the day, the Dow Jones Industrial Average had fallen 777 points, losing 6.9% of its value. It was the stock market's largest one-day drop ever. Although some conservative groups and politicians such as DeMint still opposed the bailout, the market panic was enough to change many minds. And among those who flipped during the next 48 hours were the Kochs. But if the Kochs' personal interest in protecting their portfolio had trumped their free market principles, they weren't about to mention it in front of a group full of libertarians whose cash they wanted to combat Obama. Instead, the sentiment among the donors, as the first Koch seminar of the Obama era came to an end, was, as one witness put it, like a bunch of gorillas beating their chests. After hearing both sides out, the assembled guests chose the path of extremism. The Kochs had already concluded that they would need to resort to extraordinary political measures to achieve their goals. A few days before the January 2009 donor seminar, Charles and David Koch had privately weighed their options with their longtime political strategist in a meeting inside the black glass fortress that served as Koch Industries' corporate headquarters in Wichita, Kansas. Advisors to Obama later acknowledged he had no inkling of what he was up against. He had campaigned as a partisan politician who had idealistically taken issue with those who liked to slice and dice our country into red and blue states. His vision, like his own racial blend and geographic heredity, was one of reconciliation, not division. The sentiment was laudable, but alas, wishful thinking. The newly sworn-in president looked down at the ground directly beneath his polished shoes. The book Dark Money by Jane May.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Sam Sachs, filling in on Anything Goes Friday. Just some quick information about me for those of you who don't know. When I'm not filling in to host the Thom Hartmann Program here, I'm running my own lefty news website called DistrictSentinel.com. It's a watchdog news outlet based here in Washington, D.C., covering what's going on in Congress and the various executive agencies. Check it out at DistrictSentinel.com. And also check out my nightly podcast. It's called District Sentinel Radio. It's a news rundown Monday through Thursday. It's free. It's available on iTunes by searching for District Sentinel Radio. Subscribe and you'll have it automatically downloaded to your devices every evening. And also to help support all of those projects I just mentioned, check out my Patreon, patreon.com/District Sentinel. We've got all sorts of goodies and perks for our subscribers over there. Okay, enough with the self-plugs there. Let's take some of your calls. How about Dave calling from Huffman Est, Illinois? Is that right?
Huffman Estate.
There you go.
Yeah, when you and John were talking on the impeachment, we've only had two that were impeached, and then by the time it came up to the senators, it got acquitted. Both Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton were acquitted by that you need 67 senators, and all those both on the House and the Senate side that there's not many who exude profiles and courage up there. So
yeah. That is the thing. Is it we could start the proceedings. They wouldn't necessarily be effective in actually removing Trump from office. One issue I wanted to get in with John, but it didn't have time, is how since the impeachment proceedings against Bill Clinton, we've seen the executive branch grow in power immensely. George W. Bush and Dick Cheney grew the power of the executive branch, starting wars all over the place that weren't really declared. Barack Obama, to a large extent, extended that growth of the power of the executive branch. We now have Donald Trump, who wants to take it to another level, an authoritarian like Donald Trump. I feel like impeachment proceedings, at the very least, could work to reassert the legislative branch's power in the sort of checks and balances game that our government relies on right now, that's out of whack because of how powerful the executive branch has grown. So just the practice of going through the motions might be helpful. And as John and I talked about, it could be a pretty decent midterm election slogan, help give us the majorities in Congress so that we can impeach Donald Trump.
Well, possibly, but like you said, there was a couple of Democrats who were waffling already just at talking about it, so.
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe we should be calling their offices. Dave, thanks so much for the call. Let's go to, see if we've got any more. Sure, we got another impeachment call here. Johnny calling from Lamarck, Texas. Hey, Johnny.
Hey, I'm surrounded by Republicans, but I'm still trying to keep the faith.
Good work.
Listen,
Keep up.
Here's my deal. The whole idea, as far as I'm concerned, for having a vice president is if the president is taken ill or if he's killed in a boat accident or something. But if the president himself is removed from office because of incompetence or thievery or something that attests to his character is unworthy, then all his choices, not just his cabinet members, but also his choices, including that of vice president, should also be removed. And we start fresh with a new election. None of this chain of power stuff, because that can be connived with, as we've seen the Republicans doing. I think that does us a big disservice if we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak.
Yeah, I hear you, Johnny. Take them all down. I think there are some skeletons in Mike Pence's closet here in regard to the whole Flynn scenario. When Flynn apparently talked about sanctions with the Russian ambassador, and then he was fired by the Trump administration. It was under the claim that Pence was misled, that Flynn lied to Mike Pence about the nature of those phone calls. I've never really believed that story. I've always believed that Donald Trump, that Mike Pence knew what Flynn was talking about with the Russians, if not directing Flynn to pick up the phone and call the Russians to talk about sanctions. Because let's remember, right after that phone call between Flynn and the Russian ambassador, it came the day that President Obama sanctioned some individuals over election hacking, and then we saw the Russians decide not to retaliate, probably because of something that Flynn told Kislyak on the phone. And then we saw Donald Trump praise the Russian decision to not retaliate, which suggests that Donald Trump wanted to take credit for something his administration was responsible for, which would mean he knew that Flynn was talking about these issues with the ambassador. And if Trump knew, I'm pretty sure that Mike Pence knew. And then the real story becomes that the Trump administration knew that Flynn was engaging in these sort of negotiations before they assumed the office, which could be in violation of certain laws that prevent citizens from engaging in foreign policy without the permission of the president, because Obama was president at the time, even though those laws aren't really enforceable. But you could see that the administration was trying to cover its butt when this came out. So instead, they basically threw Flynn under the bus and said, oh, we didn't know he was talking about this stuff. Really? Did Flynn act on his own accord to call the Russian ambassador and tell them not to retaliate on these sanctions? Did he do that just on his own? He came up with the idea on his own? I doubt that. Plus, Pence, there are questions of whether or not he knew that Flynn was under investigation related to getting all this money from Turkey and RT and stuff and not disclosing it. And yet Pence still brought him in because Pence was heading the transition team. Pence claims he didn't know. There's pretty strong evidence to suggest he did know. So I think that Pence has some skeletons in his closet. I think he's been less than truthful on several times already with the American people. So any impeachment proceedings toward Trump could definitely include Mike Pence as well. We'll get to more of your calls in just a little bit. I want to talk about the Paris climate deal. So when Trump announced the pullout on Thursday, he called the deal draconian, despite the fact that it wasn't really enforceable. He went on his typical America First nationalist screed about how he was elected to look out for Pittsburgh, not Paris, even though this isn't looking out for Paris. It's just the name of the deal. This wasn't too surprising. There were reports saying Trump was going to do this in the days leading up to it. He had already moved to scrap the Clean Power Plan, which was necessary. The Clean Power Plan must be in place in order for the U.S. to live up to its commitments in Paris. So if Trump was already scrapping the Clean Power Plan, then he clearly had no interest in living up to the commitments in Paris either. But still, this is a big loss for the planet. I mean, say what you want about the effectiveness of this accord to begin with. It was the only option that's on the table right now to save the planet. And now it's seriously crippled. And it's a big win for guys like Steve Bannon, the nationalist wing within the White House, who reportedly was one of the main forces trying to convince Trump to back out of the deal. And the Bannon wing had looked pretty marginalized for the last few months. There were talks that, just a few months ago that Bannon was on his way out following the debacle with the Muslim ban that was shot down. By the way, the administration has appealed to the Supreme Court on that yesterday, so we're probably going to get the highest court in the land to finally weigh in on the constitutionality of Trump's Muslim ban, which has been beaten back in lower courts already. But Bannon was left for dead. His influence in the White House, he was cast aside during the healthcare debate initially, and yet here he is surging back into power and prominence within the White House with Trump listening to him on this issue. There are reports from inside the administration, likely leaks from people who are trying to convince Trump to stay in the Paris climate deal, that folks like Bannon and the EPA chief, Scott Pruitt, who sued when he was the Attorney General of Oklahoma to kill the Clean Power Plan, but that Bannon and Pruitt were feeding the president misinformation and lies to convince him to drop out of the deal. And it was pretty clear when you hear Trump talk about a draconian Paris climate deal, he doesn't know how the deal works. He doesn't understand it. Again, it's up to the U.S. to self-comply with it. There are no laws forcing the U.S. to do any of this stuff. It's commitments the U.S. has made and put on the table, and they're going to live up to them. But Trump calls it draconian. But here's the most bizarre part of all of this. Apparently, Trump consulted a Fox News talking head before making his decision. Kimberly Guilfoyle, one of the hosts of The Five. Is that show even on the air anymore? I think it's still on the air. She's one of the hosts of The Five on Fox News. She claimed on TV yesterday that Trump called her in the morning to get advice from her beforehand about what to do with the Paris climate deal. He called Kimberly Guilfoyle. No offense to Kimberly. I mean, she used to be a former lawyer. I'm sure she's sharp. But she's best known for reading right-wing rants off a teleprompter right now on Fox News. She has zero knowledge of foreign affairs, global politics, climate science, international agreements, nothing. Why is Trump calling her to get advice on what to do Paris climate deal? The most powerful man in the world is seeking out advice on a decision that literally affects the fate of the world from someone on Fox News. And not even, the prominent talking heads on Fox News. One of the hosts of The Five. You really can't make this stuff up. I mean, who else did Trump call yesterday? Sarah Palin? Did he call Ted Nugent to ask about the Paris climate deal? Kurt Schilling? Did he call Kurt Schilling up as well? Get his advice on what to do? Patients are in charge of the asylum here, folks. And they have nukes. Bit of good news, though. In the wake of Trump's decision to pull out of the climate deal, other entities are stepping up to protect the climate. Several states, 30 of them, lots of cities, a couple dozen companies have come forward to announce their own plans to reduce carbon emissions and start investing in green technology. They are not waiting on Trump, and really neither should the rest of us. All right, Joey. Joey's calling from Oak Lawn, Illinois. Hey, Joey.
Hey, good morning, guy. Great show.
Thanks.
Donald Trump in this accord. You got to be kidding me. How could he take advice from a talking head on Fox News?
It's unbelievable.
I find it. I mean, you just knocked. I can't believe that. That drives me crazy.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I lost my train of thought. That just floored me.
That's fine.
Wow.
That's fine, Joey. When I saw that story, I think I saw a tweet about it, and I thought it was a joke. I thought it was The Onion. I thought it couldn't possibly be serious. Then I watched the clip of Kimberly Guilfoyle, and she's funny because she's talking about the issue, and then at the end of her rant, she says, "Yeah, that's what the president told me this morning when he called me." She kind of buried the lead that the president had called her on this issue. I don't know. I'm honestly curious about who else he called. Because if he called Kimberly Guilfoyle, I'm sure he called lots of other people on this issue. Very strange stuff. Very strange stuff. Cliff, calling from Canyon Country, California. Hey, Cliff, what's up?
Hello, Sam. Great talking to you.
Thanks. Good talking to you.
I've enjoyed you all week. You've done an excellent job.
Thank you.
First, just imagine all that's happened in the last 4 months and replace Trump with Barack Obama, and how would the right be reacting to all this?
Oh, it would be
Give
the
me a
biggest
break.
scandal, one after the other.
We'd never hear the end of it. Anyways, what I really wanted to talk about was the ongoing disaster in Japan that seems to be forgotten by mostly everyone.
Yeah.
Fukushima nuclear radiated water has been flown into the Pacific Ocean for like over 4 years.
Yep.
And it's never covered anywhere. It's like it's been completely forgotten, and we're all being kept in the dark as to what's really going on. I mean, what the real danger is, and personally, I'm very concerned for the future. I think this is very serious, and we know almost nothing about the current situation. And lastly, Sam, several weeks ago, Tom had Kevin Camps, I think his name is, from Beyond
Kevin.
Nuclear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and at the end of the interview, Kevin mentioned that the Obama administration had drastically raised the acceptable levels of radiation in our food and water. And, I mean, really drastically, like 10, 20, 100 times the acceptable levels. And I don't even think they're testing, like, some of these big fish, the big tunas and things in the Pacific Ocean. And it really disturbs me. I want to know what your take is on all this.
Thanks for the call, Cliff. And yeah, it disturbs me too. I'm glad you brought it up because you're right. Nobody else is bringing it up. I remember seeing those reports about the EPA raising the limits on allowable radiation. I don't know all the full details of it. Kevin Camps is a more than reliable source on these issues, so I trust him on these things. I know that they just resumed like rice farming in the Fukushima prefecture. There's a lot of concerns there that it's still not safe to do this. People are moving back in. This was one of the worst ecological disasters in the history of the world here. And there's no solution. There's no solution here to it yet. This is an ongoing crisis. And it reminds me of this podcast, 99% Invisible. They did a story back when the U.S. was building a permanent nuclear storage facility. And they were wrestling with the question of how to warn future generations not to step foot in this facility because it's dangerous. It's going to store nuclear radiation. And the problem they confronted is, we got to look at a time horizon not of 100 years or 200 years to warn people, but 10,000 years, because that's how long this stuff's going to be dangerous for. How do you warn someone 10,000 years from now? Are people going to be speaking English? They weren't speaking English 10,000 years ago. Are they going to know the same symbology we do? I don't know. We don't know a way to store this stuff yet, and here we are going full in on nuclear power. It's crazy.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Interesting news out of France regarding allegations of hacking over there. I'll break that down in just a little bit. Plus, Anything Goes Friday, more of your calls.
Number one, Emailgate is not the same as Watergate, which was actually a whole series of crimes, a major criminal conspiracy inside the White House by Richard Nixon. A continuation, in fact, as Lamar Waldron has talked about on this program, a continuation of criminal conspiracies that Nixon engaged in back in the late 50s when he was vice president. Taking bribes from the Dairy Association, screwing up the U.S. relationship with Cuba, on behalf of, or attempting to, on behalf of the casino and mafia millionaires down in Cuba, and his ties to the mob and everything. I mean, it was amazing, and that's why in 73, 74, 75, after the Church Commission and after Nixon's resignation in 75, and after all this stuff, that there were these new laws passed, right, to prevent this kind of thing. Laws that many of which have now been struck down by our U.S. Supreme Court, specifically by conservatives on the Supreme Court, who say that somehow criminal activity, that's a conservative value. Corporations swinging elections, rich people swinging elections, those are conservative values. These same conservatives who claim to be so religious. But you go to like Matthew 25, where Jesus is sitting there saying, and the disciples, they say to him, well, how do we get to heaven? And he says, in the last days, I'll be sitting there sorting the goats from the sheep. Right? And I mean, you can fill in your religion. There's stories like this in the Quran. There's stories like this in the Old Testament. There's stories like this in the Upanishads. There's the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, you name it. He says, I'll be sitting there sorting the sheep from the goats, right? The sheep are going to heaven, the goats are going to hell. And I will say to the sheep, or I'll say to the goats, when I was thirsty, you didn't give me water. When I was hungry, you didn't feed me. When I was in prison, you didn't visit me. When I was naked, you didn't clothe me. When I was sick, you didn't heal me. Off to hell with you. And I'm going to say to the sheep, when I was thirsty, blah-de-blah, and you're going with me to heaven, to the sheep, who fed him when he was hungry. And the disciples freaked out because they were like, we've never seen you hungry. How do we get to heaven? We're screwed. We've never seen you sick. We've never seen you naked. We've never seen you, unintentionally, or, lacking clothing or shelter. We've never seen you thirsty or hungry. We've never seen, it's like, and you haven't been in prison. We haven't been able to visit you. How do we get to heaven? And Jesus said, as you did to the least of these among you, you've done to me. This is like, Christianity 101, but it's also humanity 101. But that's not a conservative value, right? The conservative value, we should give health care to the children of poor people in red states. Expand Medicaid, so that the children of poor working people in the Republican-controlled states can have health care. Oh, no. That's not a conservative value. Let's try to have everybody in the country have health care. Nope, sorry, that's not a conservative value. Let's try to make sure that people have housing. No, that's not a conservative value. Let's do something about food stamps, all these other, but nope, sorry, that's not a conservative. Well, what the hell is a conservative value anymore? Other than money and power. Doing away with regulations so that petro-billionaires can make more money and giant corporations can poison our planet. What the hell happened?
Hey, we're still here. Anything Goes Friday. I'm Sam Sachs, filling in on the Thom Hartmann Program. Michael, calling from Los Angeles, California. What's up, Michael?
Good morning, Sam.
Morning.
I was calling about California State Senator Josh Newman. I don't know if you heard or not, but he's a Democrat from Fullerton, and that he's being bullied with a recall because he voted for a tax hike on the gasoline to repair roads. And you got Republicans now having talk radio shows drumming up support to recall him. He's only been a senator for 4 months out of a 4-year term. And the only thing he did was vote for a gas tax.
Wow.
There's nothing else that they're accusing him of.
I'm guessing he wasn't the only one who supported it.
I'm sorry?
I'm guessing he wasn't the only guy who supported it.
Yeah, you're right. The thing is that it took 2/3 votes to pass that. And he was not the deciding vote. It's just that he's the youngest of them all, of the state senators, and they're going after him. I just wanted to talk about it. Hopefully somebody in Fullerton can pick up on it, and they can do a little bit more and supporting him.
Yeah, Michael, thanks for raising that attention to the audience. You said that we've got right-wing radio on pushing for this guy's recall. Well, maybe we can get some left-wing radio working to save him here. The gas tax is important in that state. We need to fund transportation projects and things like that. So seems like some underhanded tactics by Republicans. We'll be right back. More Thom Hartmann Program after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Donut Economics, brand new book by Kate Raworth, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. And on page 21 in the Who Wants to Be an Economist chapter, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist, here they are. Whether you consider yourself an economic veteran or novice, now is the time to uncover the economic graffiti that lingers in all of our minds. And if you don't like what you find,